Hello, and thank you to our guests as well as our attendees for joining us. My name is Emma Skalka. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing here at Victor Stanley and also the co-chair of TCLF together with Eric Groft. My colleagues and I at Victor Stanley are thrilled to partner with TCLF and the speakers on this lecture, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce a dear colleague and friend, Charles Birnbaum.
Emma, thank you so much. Good morning to all. I too want to thank Victor Stanley for their steadfast support of this series, as well as World Landscape Architecture, who have been a media partner in getting the word out and introducing us to a broader international community. I have the great pleasure of introducing our moderator today, Beth Meyer. I know that Beth is known to most people on this webinar. Beth has taught at the University of Virginia since 1993, where she served as the Merrill D. Peterson Professor of Landscape Architecture at UVA School of Architecture, and she served as the Dean from 2014 to 2016. Beth taught previously at both Cornell University and Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. Beth is the founder of the Center for Cultural Landscapes at UVA School of Architecture and was appointed to the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts under President Barack Obama. There she served as a commission member from 2012 to 2021 and as vice chair from 2017 to 2021. She is currently the inaugural faculty director at UVA's Sustainability Lab at Morven. Beth's many honors include the Vincent Scully Prize from the National Building Museum and the Jack Carpenter Teaching Medal from the American Society of Landscape Architects. She's a dear friend, hard to imagine, for 40 years, and has been a supporter of TCLF since our founding some 25 years ago. When TCLF set its sights on the creation of an international prize in landscape architecture now some decade ago, Beth was the first call I made. After she agreed to chair our inaugural advisory committee for the prize, all others that were invited agreed immediately once they learned Beth had committed. Beth's unwavering and steadfast support to our students is only matched by her advocacy commitment to diverse cultural landscapes that may be at risk due to erasure or neglect. We're fortunate to have Beth with us today to moderate our second Oberlander Prize Forum with our current laureate, Kongjian Yu, joined by Pieter Schengenga. Today's forum is aptly named Soak It Up. We encourage all of you to do just that. With that, Beth Meyer.
Many thanks, Charles, and to all of you who are here either late or early in your days. It's a great pleasure to be moderating this conversation. And I want to preface the conversation with just a few brief remarks about what we might learn from two remarkable programs, one at a national scale, the other at a national scale, but undertaken by a private individual and firm, and what we might learn as we compare them and contextualize these extraordinary water planning and design projects that started before many people were thinking clearly about the impact of climate change on our coastal and water conditions. So the fact that both of these projects, we can now, when I say projects, I'm thinking about a life project for Kongjian, that they give us over a decade of experience in planning and designing multifunctional, cross-scalar planning and design projects. I have to admit to a sense of surprise and kind of uncanny pleasure having these two situations in the Netherlands and in China in relationship to each other, because I learned about the work in the Netherlands in 2006 from Dirk Simon, a colleague of Peter's, at a symposium here at UVA on landscape as infrastructure, the 2006 Woltz Symposium, hosted and funded by Thomas Woltz of Nelson Bird Woltz. And so here we are, can it really be 18 years later, beginning to understand not only the possibilities and the vision of these endeavors, but the impacts that they're having. So a little bit about water, landscape architecture, design and planning. I'm sure most of you are quite aware that we're not talking about a new endeavor. If you've read a Western text of Vitruvius, you'll know that the siting of cities was clearly in relationship to water, its availability, and its hazards. Kongjian has talked about the impact of vernacular waterscapes in Mesoamerica as one of the touchstones outside of China that he's been thinking about. And many of us who've taken or taught courses in 19th century modernizing cities think about the models of Paris and Boston as two different ways of beginning to imagine and deal with water in the city. If we think about Alphand and Haussmann, we're thinking about a landscape architecture of boundaries and lines, whether it's the scale of a curb, keeping water away from the sidewalk and in a low area of the street, or at the scale of walls and riverbanks. And then comparing that to the situation of Boston, what we might now think of as more nature-based infrastructure, but one that was definitely a hybrid and also included pipes, because the land available for the sponge of the fens was not large enough to deal with the flooding problems of the 1880s in Boston. But from those earlier projects, we have these two conceptual models, a landscape of lines and a landscape of field conditions. And it's this landscape of field conditions, thinking about not water versus land, but a condition of moisture to dryness and what it means to design within that gradient. So I'm extremely excited to hear from each of our speakers. Kongjian will start. Each of them will speak for about 10 minutes. And then we'll have time for a lively discussion and Q&A. And I look forward to being back with the two of them in about 20 minutes. So Kongjian, if you're ready, you can load up your images and start your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Beth. We are talking about 18 years ago, but actually I'm thinking about 28 years ago when I sit in the classroom in Boston at the JST, listen to your lecture. It's so amazing that it's been 28 years. So here is my slides. And it is so appropriate to talk about flood today. My topic will be is creating sponge planet. So I just want to go to beyond your backyard and the city actually, and go to talk about this planet. We need a solution. I call the water-based solution to climate crisis. Now, here are the challenges. You all know that flood, drought happen everywhere, fires and the temperatures. And particularly for flood, as conventional solution is this great infrastructure, dam, dikes, pipe system, and so on, almost everywhere in China and the US actually leading the way. We are so proud of this Hoover Dam. And this problem is still even worse today. You can see just a couple months ago, Libya got flood. I think it's about 1,000 people killed. And Beijing 2012 is the capital, 79 people killed. And today, here's the global news and BBC, you see even in Kenya, dozens of people died because of the dam collapse. Just like a bomb, Kenya flash flood killing at least 45 people. So dam is a bomb, you imagine, you see? So dams and concrete walls accumulate water. So it's even higher the risk. And so these are all the great infrastructure that actually cause the problem. So not only that, it accumulates all this carbon, and increasing, we are going to use more create more carbon emissions. Look at this chart. In Asia, in the next decades, you will see more and more carbon will be produced by just building all this infrastructure. And another side of the story is that about 40% of sea level rising is actually contributed to the flood and the drainage, the drainage of the aquifer and so on. So we have a dry globe actually. It's not a flood, it's not a wet globe, we have a dry globe. So the alternative, I will say, is a sponge planet. To extend from the sponge city to the whole planet. That's my cartoon imagine about our future planet. Now, its philosophy is to retain water at its source, slow down its flow, and be adaptive to the sink. 4 principles which are totally opposite to the conventional gray infrastructure. You may think that we are talking about the planet, in a sponge planet, its whole global surface might be impossible. But actually, when you look at its history, the whole globe has been actually transformed, especially in those areas in the monsoon region. Here is the miles, thousands of miles of terraces in South China's high mountain. And here you will see thousands of miles of pond and dike system at the delta area. So we are transforming the global surface. So inspired by these very simple farming techniques for thousands of years of experience, here I have some of the models, modular solutions, terracing, the slope, ponding, the valley, and the diking and ponding, the flooded area, and even islanding the water surface. By upgrading these solutions, we can virtually solve almost all water-related problems, no matter flood or drought. For 20 years, I have tested all these modular solutions and created this kind of conceptual model at the regional and the watershed scale, from sponge catchment to sponge waterway and sponge farm and sponge pond and sponge city, and all the way to sponge lake and ocean. 3 basic solutions, 3 basic principles: retain water. Whenever water falls, retain water. Here is an example about 1 kilometer, 1 square kilometer in size, right in the middle of the city of Sanya, transforming the monsoon area into a resilient urban landscape, which I call sponge. Here is today, in just 5 years, you have such a kind of urban green sponge, which can regulate about 1 million cubic meter of stormwater, solves the problem of urban flood in an area about 10 times as much as the park itself. Here is a recent project in Benjakiti forest, Benjakiti in Thailand, Bangkok, right in the middle of the city, transforming a brownfield into a sponge park. It is basically a central park in the middle of the city. Now, certainly not just about water, it is also about the restoration of habitat and creation of people's recreational space. The second is slow down. We have to remove all the urban concrete in the city and transform into landscape-based or green or land-based sponge. Here you can see our city will be much, much more resilient if we doing that. And even the ocean and the sea walls, we're building more, continually building the sea walls like that. And certainly we have better solutions. Here is an example in Sanya City in Hainan Island. We virtually remove the seawall and introduce recovers the habitat for mangroves to get established and become a more resilient sea wall around the coast area for flood. Now here is a very new project which was finished last year is literally a long seawall people build to try to protect the city from being flooded. But you will see that the seawall actually destroys the native habitat. Yes, that's comparison between unbuilt and the built is such a destruction. And this simply because the seawall causes salination. So our solution is a landscape-based, nature-based solution to remove the seawall, to replace it with the landscape. So that's existing as today as rebuilt seawall and become more resilient, and certainly multiple benefit for the city and for biodiversity, and certainly for become a beautiful park. So it is about this transformation, the whole infrastructure, the way how we build our cities, the way how we build our resilient planet, water-based. I will say, instead of maybe not instead of, but certainly including carbon mitigation. So beyond backyard landscape, it is about our investment on our common planet. Carbon-centered solution, which we have invested millions, billions dollars, or water-centered solution, which we have minimal investment. So Sponge Planet is that what I think is our investment target for the future, that can solve not only adaptation, but also certainly mitigation. It is a holistic solution, habitat recovery, and also solve even the sea level rise. So that's my short discussion, for a short presentation for you to raise a very provocative maybe discussion. Yes.
Thank you so much, Kongjian. And we'll hold off on questions until we have both presentations. So Peter, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to join this event. I'm Pieter Schengenga, landscape architect from the Netherlands, from the office of H+N+S Landscape Architects, and I'm going to take you along first an introduction of the Dutch river region, because we have a lot of water, as you know, and a lot of water to deal with in times of climate change. And then I have some projects, or some examples of our work, from Room for the River, but also some dike reinforcement projects, because that's also needed, and needed harder than ever, I can say. Well, first, the Netherlands, here in the middle of the picture, is part of the Rhine Basin, and it's in the delta of the Rhine Basin, and we need to deal with a lot of water that comes from Germany and Switzerland also, and especially when the snow is melting in spring, and it goes together with heavy rainfall somewhere in the catchment areas. Yeah, in another way than other rivers, the Dutch rivers are typically, because they're not in a valley, but they're in the middle of a polder system, in the middle of subsided land on both sides, and surrounded by high dikes. So if a dike breaches, it would cause a big disaster in a big area, a low-lying area, and especially the area where the biggest cities are in the Netherlands. This is a picture from the 90s, when the dikes were just high enough to keep all the water out. It almost went wrong, and a lot of people had to evacuate, but they were just strong enough in that times, but it was a big warning. After that, the idea came up to create more room for rivers, especially because more water was expected in the future. There were a lot of ideas to create more room. So the idea was the rivers discharges in the future would, actually, the river area would be suitable for higher discharges that were expected in the future. And creating more room is possible by a lot of types of measures, and here you see some of them, especially dike relocation in the top right corner, or lowering floodplains, extra water challenges, all kinds of things you could use. And after a lot of discussion, decided was that in 34 locations in the Netherlands, those projects were carried out. So, for example, in the city of Nijmegen, which is here, and the city of Kampen. And we as an office worked on some of these projects and also in those two cities. Kampen. Kampen is in the IJssel Valley, the IJssel Delta, which is in the north of the river region. And as you can see here, is an historic city that provides very little space to widen the riverbed. So what was the decision that was made? Not to widen the riverbed here, but to design a completely new river branch over here. And the river branch is designed south from the city, and it's located well in an area that has a long history in fighting the water already through the centuries. Here you can see the situation as it was, with a lot of old dikes, molds were farmsteads were created, also remains of old breaches, but also infrastructure. So it was hard to position the river there. But it was the plan that was made by our office and others, of course, because this was a big project, took many years. But it's a new river branch of about 6-7 kilometers, 12 kilometers of new dikes on both sides, and also a lot of space for new nature, delta nature, influenced by the water. The water can move here freely. And it was designed as some kind of a creek that starts very little and is wide at the end. So new nature from above, lots of new bridges also. On stilts above the water landscape. Nicely designed sluices. This one is for recreation, shipping, so it can also be used for boating. Lots of new dikes with bicycle paths that give a nice view over the marshes, and it's used and loved a lot by the inhabitants of the surrounding. The same for Nijmegen, which is a city, and it's a much more urban surrounding than in Kampen. This was the plan on the left side that was there already to expand the city on the north side of the river. But while the idea of room for a river came up, the plan was adapted, and instead of a city behind the dike, the idea was to create a city in contact with the water. So with new bridges, new islands, and lots of ways to experience the water. This was the plan, and you can see here the line of the original dike. The dike was realigned, bridges were expanded, a new gully was constructed, and also lots of different landscape like beaches, natural areas, steep edges, hard case, green case, everything. So the challenge and also the opportunity was seen to create a park here, but not a park like you see in lots of cities and also in Nijmegen a lot already, to create an urban river park that brings nature to the heart of the city. This was the area while constructing, and this was the final situation as is. And you can also see the inlet over here just before it overtops at high river levels. And you can see how it's used. This quay was constructed before the city was developed after the quay. So it's a new promenade that was already there for future urban expansion. Dike reinforcement is also still needed. And this was the way it was done in the 70s. Whole cities disappeared, were removed to make place for new and stronger dikes. But that was not longer accepted by inhabitants, of course. And now we know more gentle ways to put more attention to local qualities and also to daily use. I think a lot of benefits are there if you succeed to include land use, normal land use with the dikes. For example, we succeeded to design these dike berms, which are part of the technical dikes, with a gentle slope in which normal land use is possible. For example, a vineyard over here. Along the Maas, other dike types were constructed, and the idea was not to create a classic dike, but created as a landfill over here with steep edges that also can erode a bit, and that's beneficial also for ecology. And you see it from above. And if natural solutions are not possible anymore, you can go back to engineering. Sometimes this is a plan. It will be constructed in a few years in the city of the town of Arce, which is a historical city. There's not much space to create dikes. And we are part of a team that designed a floating dike over here. So if the water goes up by natural, this construction starts to flow and this comes up and you have an extra 2 meters of safety here in the city, terrace, but even in private gardens where the construction can be covered with a lawn. So a whole overview of water solutions. So far, I hope it's inspiring.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Kongjian. And perhaps the three of us can begin to chat together. I see lots of clapping, so thank you, everyone, all 400 and something of you who are watching. It's fantastic. I have a series of questions teed up, and I also see that a few of you have questions also, so I'll get to those as efficiently as I can. And I think one of the questions I wanted to start with, and it was based on just my own background knowledge and reading of both projects, but each of you spoke to it very explicitly, is that you're working through systems, but you also have developed a set of tactics that can be plugged and played in different contexts. So the system is the kind of larger way for understanding the big water flow project, but there's a recognition that one solution doesn't work everywhere. So I wonder if each of you could talk about the development of the modular tactics that you've created. And you each had nice three-dimensional drawings of those tactics, and whether, if they came from vernacular landscape knowledge, if they came from specific modifications of standard techniques, and just share with us your creative process for coming up with those various tactics. Kongjian, do you want to start?
Yes, I think that when we talk about the scale, different scales, when your farming is actually such a big scale practice, in my country, in my region, we are suffering monsoon climate. So we have different climate. So monsoon, which means we have very dry season, we have very wet season. So China has been for thousands of years experiencing monsoon climate, and that's climate change. It's climate change. Okay, so European now become monsoon-like, but monsoon being here in Asia, in East Asia, Southeast Asia for thousands of years. So as I inspired myself, actually, I also been farming for 17 years in my own village. So I learned from how actually use very simple tool to address not only flood, but also drought. It's how to regulate flood, how to regulate water. And the second is about agriculture, is about crops, aquaculture, rice. Rice is our main crop here, in staple crop in China or in Southeast Asia, and maintains a stable certain amount of water. That's so important. So I think that's very unique for the monsoon region, is that you make fields. So I think that the modular form is so different, but they address different situations. Terraces, it can address when we need to retain water at the slope. You know, pond, you create a little dam to create a pond, which you actually, it's used to force the valley, little valley, yeah, little creeks. And damming and dike and pond system, which should be, you will see when water is too much in Pearl River Delta, Yangtze River Delta. If the Mississippi River was cultivated by the Chinese farmers, it will be all pond and dike system, I will see. And when you have too much water, you will have the lake or the ocean, you have floating garden, which you will see in Aztec people. Aztec culture also have similar agricultural solution. And certainly in China, in other part of the world, which you have to deal with too much flood, too much water. So this module I find is so useful. That scale down, and creates this. You can create a whole kind of landscape by integrating different, depending on different topography and different hydrological situation. And actually, this is a way of creating habitat. Now, the farming habitat is for rice, but when in urban situation, when we want to restore the biodiversity of the habitat, is actually function as a habitat creation technology. So I think that's what I found so useful and can be replicated. Totally different from European situation. In Europe, I would say in Netherlands or in England, you will see the pastoral landscape. You didn't use a terracing. You are not terracing the slope usually because you cattle and sheep. So I think that's very different. Crops farming, yeah, that's my experience. But I want to learn from Peter what particular experience teach you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, of course, yeah, it's actually we're a terrace landscape, Kongjian, but more the other way around a bit. Huh? It's from low to lower to lower to lower, and you end up very low below sea level, of course. So that's the, and we need to pump up the water from every terrace up instead of delaying it and letting it down. So that's our problem, is even a bit bigger, I guess. Yeah. But that's an important principle. Water follows gravity. That's something I would say, Beth. But I think, you need to discover those principles, and you also need to have proof for it somehow. So what I always do, and what I really like, is work together with engineers. Always. Ask them, how does it work? I want to understand how it works. And if they cannot explain it, I ask again. And if I can explain it, I can use it and I can explain it to others. And then actually, maybe I think you always experience that, Kongjian. If we understand it, we are able, I would like to explain something in a simple way. Like everyone should understand. And everyone does, I think. Things like, well, in the winter we have too much water, and in summer we have a shortage. What's the solution? Of course, do not send every drop to the sea, and a few months later you need it, of course. So keep it, delay it, let it infiltrate in the ground, and reuse it. So that's something. Circulation, local cycles, all these kinds of things. So logical.
Yeah.
Peter, you started to address one of the other questions I had, which is about the collaborations that allow you to be so effective dealing with water infrastructure at the scale of sites and regions. And I'm wondering, Kongjian, if you want to talk a little bit about other collaborators. Do the two of you have soil scientists, engineers, collaborators that you use and collaborate with often? Do you go to different groups at different times? I think that would be a helpful context for understanding the success of the work.
Yes. So, well, as Beth, I think we have to understand that such scale landscape practice in China is virtually a very new profession. You know, in China we have a wonderful tradition of gardening, but that's very small scale gardening. And it's at such a scale is basically farming. So urbanization in China was actually very current phenomenon. Only half century, only 500. I mean, 50 years maximum. So for a long time, we only have gardening and farming. But farming is actually, we don't have scientists. It's nature. It is nature-based. It is experience-based. So I will say we don't have some very specific such kind of very specific cooperation. Actually, I am like a farmer. I have very holistic experience based on my own experience so far. Yes, not much. I will say that's why I have built this team much big. And also because of my personal experience as a farmer and as an ecologist, as a planner, and so make me a kind of a more like a very traditional, holistic, entity, something like that.
Peter, how about your firm? Is it multidisciplinary, or do you work with engineers that are mostly in the public sector? How does that work?
Yeah, we're only landscape architects. That's a choice, of course, because I think we're quite a large group. We can develop ourselves in our own profession. But most of our people, actually, landscape architecture in the Netherlands has different origins, of course. But the big orange is in the improvement of land for agriculture. So it was educated also at the agricultural university. And lots of our colleagues still have that background, and so do I. So I also have some knowledge about water and soil, and also engineering and things like that. We're engineers as well, you can say that, but also designers. But if it becomes really, if you need a special expertise, of course, we always work together with other experts like ecologists and hydrologists, engineers, everything. And all those projects are so big, they cannot only be done by us as an office, especially when it's about realization.
Yeah, fantastic. One of the few fun things about being on Zoom is I often, when I've lectured during the pandemic, I would pull a book off my shelf and do something like this. And just, I've been so struck by this 1927 slideshow of Van Esteren, who was the planner for the Boss Park. And in the book, he has pictures of rice paddies in Asia that are inspiring him when he's designing Boss Park, right? So this kind of cross-cultural awareness of these vernacular cultural landscapes that were worked out over centuries, right? I think is something for us to remember, that addressing contemporary problems often requires new technologies, but it also requires the resurrection of traditional and indigenous knowledge. There's a couple of questions that I'm seeing in Q&A and in chat, so just know I can't read them and talk at the same time, but one of the threads I'm seeing is a question about the role of plants, whether that's planting design or spontaneous vegetation, plant succession. So I wonder if the two of you could talk about different ways that you think about the soils, the particular cultural traditions of planted form, and how much you rely on planting versus spontaneous vegetation in relationship to these projects.
I could say something about that. Along the rivers, around 20 years ago, the floodplains were mainly agriculture. And then the idea came up to, because the circumstances for agriculture were not so beneficial anymore, to start with nature development along the rivers. And of course, it was important that it would not be an obstacle if the forest would grow there for the water. So then also natural cows and horses were introduced in those areas. And when designing those areas, it's very important how you create different elevations. So part of it floods every winter, part of it only with high water levels. And also the combination of flooding and those grazing cattle actually is creating more or less a pattern in a landscape with short grass, something in between. And sometimes it's really important how you think about that, especially the period in which the willow spreads the seed, the places that are open and not covered with vegetation at the moment. In 2 years, it's one willow forest. So you should know also that.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of creating the right conditions and knowing the vegetation and how it spreads.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I agree. At such a scale, global surface transformation, planting, I think, is mainly must be spontaneous, must be nature. So it's important to create habitat. What I mean create habitat is this modular form to create water-driven or water-based habitat. Mm-hmm. I will say water is the key here. Water is the key to develop any kind of vegetation, any kind of habitat. If you can control water, if you can manage water, which is also based on the management, on the creation of landform, you can create, beautifully any kind of rewilded nature. Mm-hmm. So, Beth, you talk about the beauty of sustainability, and that's why that's exactly a new kind of aesthetics. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not it's totally, we have to make landscape as a profession to solve today's a huge problem. It's not a small problem. It's a huge problem. So planting is just that it just come after we solve the problem, actually. Mm-hmm. And the planting itself is also a problem solver. Mm-hmm. So we are not want to take care of this flowers. We don't want to take care of this flower. Just my heart said, don't care about the bloody flowers. So flower taken by themselves. Mm-hmm. We just take care of water. I would say that's a solution. And I find that certainly you need to plant trees, of course, but that's very simple, very genetic knowledge about what kind of trees you can grow in wetland, in dryland, in slope, the willows, the metastiquarias, and so it's very, just plant trees. The rest of them, I would say, just let nature take over.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see a very interesting question about also erosion and growth. I bet. Kongjian, you say don't care about the flowers, but on our dikes, I would say care about the flowers, because it's discovered some time ago that natural herbs are very important because they have very strong roots, better than just normal lawn or one species. And now it's national policy also that the water boards should improve biodiversity on their dikes, and also they use natural herbs for that, because it also helps them to have a strong dike, because it's better than just simple one species of grass, mown grass.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's why plants need to solve the problem. If you need, for example, willow, I find willow is so powerful to consolidate the dikes, stop erosion, and so that, yeah, that's true. I totally agree. Yeah. So it's we need to find a new way of creating beauty.
Yeah.
You know, I think that the nature take over. That does not mean we don't need design. We need design, but a minimum design make a crafts, make beautiful artifacts, a bench, a boardwalk, a skywalk. All these can make the messy landscape beautiful.
There's a follow-up set of questions about the role of designers after implementation and construction. Do either of you or your firms continue to consult about management plans? So 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, has the design contract expanded? And if it has, what lessons did you learn from the first projects that led to some modifications for more recent work?
Peter, go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, we don't do the maintenance or maintenance guiding ourselves. Mostly it's done by the clients, or of course there are some guarantees by the constructor, of course. But of course we see our former clients back at new projects, for example, along those dikes. He did 10 kilometers of dikes, and a few years ahead, it's another project again. And what we learned from those dikes, well, one example, we started with a natural vegetation, natural herbs, some years ago. And yeah, if you just order the right seeds somewhere from a nursery, it can look like the right herbs, but if they are not original from here, from Netherlands or from a special region, yeah, things can work out very typically, and they get out, especially, well, a waterboard once ended up with very large herbs like this, for example, which were not easy to maintain. So we improved that a bit, and one of the ideas is to take off the top of the soil of the old dike, to put that apart, improve the dike with other material that they take from elsewhere, and then bring back the original soil with the original seeds, and it comes up spontaneously, and also, and it's very local, and it works out well.
Yeah, that's a nice, that's a really good lesson, I think. Kongjian, others?
Yes, I saw the question also ask about how many cities are implementing our project. I have to say we have 250 cities, almost more than 250 cities that have some kind of project built. So together we have about 1,000 projects built. I have to be straightforward that not every of them are successful. I have to say that because that's why I learned from, the failure also. Management is a big issue because you really need someone to understand the farming technique, not gardening technique, to manage the landscape actually. For example, you have to harvest the wetland, you have to harvest overgrowing vegetation for recycling the biomass. So this is a still new idea in management, at least in China, because all the educated gardeners are just know how to loom, how to cut the grass, how to prune the vegetation, but don't know how to farm the park, the farming the wetland. So we always have I have myself and my team always go back to the project. Talk to the manager, but not necessarily being, your advisor maybe not necessarily being accepted, but certainly you keep talking, educating them. Certainly not always successful, but you have to learn from the failure of your planting. For example, so we actually, I myself can learn a lot. Some, particularly since wetland, it can easily overgrow. So you need to really have very a kind of nature to control themselves. You need to select some time to avoid some, very messy, too messy, so that people cannot access the park. So always learning, I think until now, I find that minimum management is our goal. Yeah. Teaching people to manage it is always difficult. But teaching myself to create some landscape which need a minimum management is actually what I get in the past 25 years.
Great. There's a couple of questions about soils, and Peter, you addressed this in terms of saving soils from the dikes. But one of the questions was actually about brownfield sites and what experience the two of you may have had on contaminated sites, prior industrial sites where the soils were poor. I mean, I know with very privileged clients, you can manufacture soils, but that's hard to scale up to the scale of a watershed or a region. So any lessons about working on brownfield contaminated sites and how you dealt with that?
Peter?
I personally do not have so much experience in this. Sometimes, of course, you see something like that, but there are very special rules about that. And it depends on how on the type of pollution, of course. And sometimes it can be covered, and if it's stable, it's okay. And but it also determines how the land can be used, of course. But I didn't see this in these big river projects.
Yes, we have all different kind of brownfield. The very early project we did in Tianjin Chaoyuan Park, which is it is an experiment, which we did in 2007. We actually do some experiment to see that the habitat itself, the vegetation itself, actually function as cleaner of the contaminated soil, and removes the pollutant. So we are still doing this kind of experiment, how nature-based solution can actually remediate the soil. For the Banjakiti Park, the Thailand park, this brownfield is actually not so toxicated. It is a tobacco factory. It's virtually pavement. So we didn't do any soil remediation itself, but as a soil certainly is become rewilded, but in Tianjin project, Tianjin Chaoyuan Park, we did this experiment, how the vegetation can remove the pollutant. And it's being on the website, ASLA website, the performance study. Maybe you can look at. And also some other kind of soil problem like salination, salty, also planting, the water management, also sponge system actually can be a solution.
Yeah, I think what I'm extracting from your comments, Kongjian, reminds me of Alex Felson's article on designed experiments from, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. and thinking about that as another role, another phase within the design process. How do you start to test possible alternatives on site, particularly if it's a bigger project and time is not a factor?
Yes.
I don't know if this is too big a pivot, but there are some questions coming up, which I think probably resonate with practitioners in the United States particularly, but I suspect there's similar or different kinds of related questions in Asia and Europe. And it has to do with the community and the client during the process and after. So one question is, what kind of conversations do you have with the community about this new way of looking at the site, a nature-based solution, making room for the river, which might be less room for something else? And then afterwards, is there anything you learn from the community or client that has impacted how you feel about, like, how people experience the place or accept it?
Yes.
Peter?
Yeah, think about that. Of course, I think I always try to do, I think I always try to look at an area as a very special place, and you always discover a lot when you are there, and you hear a lot from the people who know it. But you can also, learn together with those people. If you look at the history, that's also something. History, cultural things. That's always what brings people together, because they know that but sometimes, if it becomes very big, like Room for the River, there needs to be somewhere a government and that decides that something is needed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, I think, the success of the Room for the River program is that on the national level was said, well, we want to lower the water levels, so you need to do that. We have money for it, and we ask you to do that in a way that you also improve the spatial quality. So there were two goals.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually the challenge from the national government given to the local government. And they were able, and also free in some way, to explore different ideas to come up with a solution. So that was very important, I think. So responsibilities don't decide everything top down, but also give space on the local government together with the inhabitants to come up with solutions. And that's how it works, I think. Mm-hmm. But of course, and my experience is also that well, if it's there, then people see it and they start to love it. Okay. That's how it works. And well, the years before, during planning, lots of people are really not interested, or it's only a small group that's really interested in joining it.
Yeah.
Kongjian, yeah. What's your experience?
Yeah, I think we have so much experience about how public enjoys this kind of landscape. In my situation in China, in Chinese situation, is that because our environment used to be so much polluted and so bad in the city, flood and urban inundation, people complaining. So it's always, people always wanted something to be done. So there's no such thing like and also the private. We don't have private land. The land here is always public land. So whenever you do something, is always people always welcome, I would say, because eventually they get benefit. The property value doubled or tripled or even quadrupled in 5 or 2 years. In my case, when the polluted river, when the flooded river get fixed, and the people get just so much benefit from that. usually the most conflicting issue is about beauty, because we have different kind of beauty, messiness, but don't underestimate people's taste about messiness. Actually, they love it. You have to understand, urban residents actually they love messiness. I have very interesting case in the, which have been published, by the way. It's in English also, called letters, several letters about, it's a Chaoyuan Park. We have this study. At the beginning, we designed this messy design experiment. And 3 years later, the local bureau, the local government, the government officials, they think that it's too messy. They want to fix, they want to ornamental garden again. So they build fences, try to go to gentrify this garden. But you know what? The local people protest that. They write a letter to me, they write a letter to mayors, and protect this messy park. So that, I think, is so interesting that our professionals and decision makers usually underestimate people's reaction to the beauty of the wild nature. Yeah, I think that's really, we have to understand the beauty factor which influence people's reaction.
Mm-hmm. So helpful to hear both those comments, and I'm really struck by the fact that the tidy version that you're referring to, Kongjian, I think is increasingly in the context of the Chinese situation understood as not adequate. But what I found so interesting, Peter, with your conversation about the reimagination of the dike so that it can include different kinds of agricultural and plant communities is not just the overly maintained spontaneous vegetation issue, but bringing in a more complex plant palette that includes practical everyday food landscapes as well. There's a question that's related to a different kind of use, and I'm not sure if either of you will be able to speak to it, but someone was wondering if you ever included spaces of play. So primarily children, I suspect, but adults also play within these water landscapes and within some of the spatial types that you've thought about. So Peter, do you want to talk about that first, and then Kongjian?
Of play, we're working on a project in Zwolle, the city. There's a new dike is being constructed, and part of the dike is, how do you call it? Glijbaan, a slide. Is that how you call it? Yeah, in dike. Yeah, so that's a little example, and that's interesting because you experience the height difference. You can let children experience that. That's a little thing. So it depends a lot on where you are. But that was in the middle of the city, where also at a place where for children, and they go out there, they use the floodplains. So the height difference can be experienced. That's interesting.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Kongjian, how about in some of your parks?
Yeah, always. I think, and as I said, I think the beauty of this park is that because they are attracting people. So we always have playground and people's, boardwalk and learning centers, environmental interpretations, always integrated in this park. Yes, it is part of ecosystem. We call it the ecosystem services. Is a cultural and spiritual and aesthetics and recreational needs. So when you look at our project in our website, you'll see always packed with people playing with playground and playground. This playground, but always playground is always integrated with nature. It's not just a very rigid, playground. It's like water flow. It's you can go into the water. You can play with mud even. So I think that's also an idea about how nature can revitalize people's genetic, connection to nature.
Yeah. I think to realize that there's a sense of wonder that comes from playing in and around places of nature, right? Whether water or plants. And that's something for us to keep in mind. There's a question primarily for Kongjian about your floating islands, and you base them on the Chinampas in Mesoamerica. I thought that was super interesting to begin to think about a new spatial tactic, a new material palette, and someone just wanted you to talk a little bit more about these islands, how big, the plant species, all that. Yeah.
Well, the island actually, Chinampa is one example, but actually in China also.
Oh, cool.
It's the miles of farming technique. So the scale, certainly the scale is always matters. It's a human scale. It's reachable. You always have to think about small scale, people scale. It's not big scale. So I find it's interesting because you can play with it, different kind of shape, pattern. It become more interesting. Like this Banjakiti in Thailand, we actually use long, circles, different kind of circles. Because of that, you can create habitat for birds. Actually, immediately birds take place because it's isolated from people. And this is the circular, we call it ecotones. The edge effect will create abundant biodiversity. As the material, just cut and fill. Simple, and use the willows or whatever to create this surround the base, and it cycles the material from when you remove the concrete, use that material to build the island. So that's can be, I think. So it's a messiness again. It's a messiness that because in my situation, not in America. I mean, in my situation, it always must be fast, must be cheap, must be low maintenance. You have to consider that not many people maintain that. You really have to make it self-sustainable and very fast, because the mayor want to see it overnight. You have to build it fast. Yeah, I think that's in my situation.
Yeah, I'm so struck by something that's really different in both your contexts, but it works. So Peter, you're in a region in a country that has been dealing with water and settlement for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? It's just baked into everybody's daily life. You're below sea level. How do you begin to rely on each other? There's a national agenda, and then there's local conditions. Kongjian, you're working in a country that is urbanized so quickly that you don't have that long-term infrastructure. So you're looking for techniques that draw on the vernacular, but that are cheap. I think about my colleague, Julie Bargman, cheap and cheerful. Like, what can you do that's fast and cheap? And yet they're both extremely impactful given the setting. And to me, that's a valuable thing for those of us in different places to begin to tap into what works, what resonates with different folks. I'm also really struck by something. I'm looking at the clock, and I see we probably should start to try to wrap things up. And I might be able to tie in two recent notes in the chat. One is about a 2021 review in Earth and Environment that says sponge cities needs to get bigger in order to deal with climate change. And Kongjian, you talked about that. We need a sponge globe, a planet, right? And then the other question is, have you ever been asked to design a sponge city for a Western country? That's Kongjian. Well, I think like what we're hearing is that this notion of sponge city can definitely travel. But I'd love the two of you to respond to those two questions by just thinking about the provocation that Kongjian started with. What does it mean to shift from a carbon-based solution to climate change, which is market-driven, is dealing with ecosystem services, which is, essentially working within a global capitalist economy? And then how do you actually, like, what is the benefit of shifting that conversation to a water-based solution for dealing with climate, the climate crisis? And what might we learn from that bigger framework?
Yeah. Peter, you want to start or?
Oh, yeah, maybe. I think water can also be an example somehow, because water is something that is understandable for everyone, and everyone understands the cycle of water. But there are much bigger issues, at least as big but more complicated. If you look at the CO2 emissions, no one sees CO2, but everyone sees the effect, and it's also a cycle. If you like at the way we ship our nutrients all over the world, things like that. So I think water and thinking of water as a cycle can be a good example to make other big issues understandable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think because carbon-centered solution fails, and I didn't see that can be better in the future. I didn't see future for carbon cutting. It just it cannot work. It's a tragedy of commons. It's very classical problem of tragedy of commons. Mm-hmm. People just talking, the national leaders trading carbon. Carbon is invisible, okay? And carbon is carbon credit, just encouraging the business to do business as usual, and just encourage them to do that. So many people already understand that. And we have invested 95% of investment is trying to cut carbon emission. Of course, that's important. I didn't say that. Well, of course, that's important. But carbon is not just a singular. It's not just one carbon. We have so many things to relate to climate change. Particularly, adaptation is now so urgent. It's an urgency. It's an urgency, particularly for global. It's a global urgent. So cutting carbon is already too late. So, and water, when we talking about water, it's not about the LID, it's not about water itself. Water is a trigger of the whole ecosystem. It is about climate adaptation, certainly. The drought, flood is all about, and it's about water quality. And also it's about biodiversity. When water dry out, no biodiversity. And also it's so interesting, I got inspired by the American hydrologist. He said, you have all the data says that 40% of sea level rising is caused by the drainage of the aquifer. You have to understand that when we fill in this dry globe, we can virtually solve half of the problem. Now that I quote Mr. Ward Wallen. He's a professor at Michigan University. He's an emeritus professor at Michigan. And that inspired me that if we have this globe filled with water, sucked, just what you said, we can virtually solve both problems, mitigation and adaptation, and the sea level rising, and the cool of the planet, right? Because the wet bulb and the dry bulb have at least 5-degree difference, or sometimes 10-degree difference. So that's a solution. That's a one stone killing 5 birds. Something. One stone killing 5 birds. Now certainly that's our imagination. That's and it is land-based. It is land-based. It is community-based. It is workable. It is scalable. It is very simple. So that I think in the future, landscape architecture has a lot of work to do. Landscape work, we have so much to do. Yes.
Peter and Kongjian, the two of you have been such a joy to interact with. This has been so inspiring, incredibly inspiring. I want to thank you so much. I keep seeing the names of people I know and love in the chat, and so I'm glad you're all here too. I look forward to following up with both of you soon, and I know that your influence has just magnified, and your enthusiasm and tenacity has been an inspiration. So thank you so much. Thanks to Cultural Landscape Foundation and Victor Stanley for hosting us, and look forward to seeing everybody out and about somewhere soon.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Beth. Wonderful, Peter, talk to you.
See y'all.
Thanks a lot, all of you. Bye.
Have wonderful questions.
Take care, Peter. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye, John.
Bye, Beth. Bye, Peter. Peter, great
Bye-bye.
job. Beth, wonderful job. Really terrific. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. See you.
So-
Bye-bye. Thanks for leading this.
So well done
Bye.
and so interesting. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.